Shalom. I'm continuing now my series on Avraham Ibn Ezra and his very original and stimulating insights into the weekly parsha. I'll first give a summary of how he used the story of Bilam and his ass and his ultimate failure at being able to curse Israel, and then the follow-up with the story of the plague. And then I will go into some detail, scratch the surface really of two complex issues that come up here, and again see how difficult it is to fit Ibn Ezra into any of the fixed categories that are used these days in doing the history of Jewish thought. So, as to the parsha itself, in Ibn Ezra's opinion, Bilam is not a prophet. He's a magician, a sorcerer, someone who can make his living by cursing. And the curse, the way he does this, it's a simple business model. He is an astrologer, and he, being expert in astrology, can foretell a disaster which eventually will happen in most places at some time, and so on. And if he's contacted, a client asks him to curse an enemy, he'll go into his, take out his astrological toolkit and see if there's any disaster on the horizon. And then if there is, he will plan it, he will time his curse to occur right before the disaster, and therefore his client will think that his curse has brought this about, and he gets paid his large sum of money and goes on to the next business. So he was going to do that here because apparently he had seen in his astrological charts that there was a plague already destined in the stars to hit the people of Israel soon. And so when Balak sent him the offer to work for him and put a curse in Israel, he thought this was a good deal, because there will be a plague coming soon. He will curse Israel, and then when the plague happens, Balak will think that that it's because of Bilam's curse, and he gets his lump sum, and everything's out good for him. And this, in order to forestall this or block it in some way, God intervened and sent Bilam a message, or a series of messages. Bilam was not a prophet. This is a sort of divine visitation that people who are not prophets get. God wanted to have it such that Bilam would not be able to curse Israel, and so, and it worked. If you follow the parsha, the story that is well known, 3 times Bilam asks Balak to set up sacrifices to get him sort of the right kind of inspiration and divine visitation that will allow him to curse. And each time, God puts into his mouth and forces him to speak a blessing on Israel. The 3rd time, Balak claps his hands in frustration, and the story ends with their parting their ways. Everyone went their own way, and that's the end. But then what happened in the next story? The next is followed immediately by the story of the Jewish men fooling around with the Midianite women, and the Midianite women convinced them or seduced them into performing, doing the pagan rituals and the pagan worship that they do. And then there's a plague. Now, there's really no connection in the Torah between the two episodes. The fooling around with the Midianite women and the plague are not at all connected to anything Bilam said. In fact, the last thing that Bilam says is his last thing regarding Israel is a prophecy for the end of days, not at the moment, at the end of days, and the ultimate glory of Israel. So there's no connection at all between the two parshiot according to the simple reading. Chazal, of course, were troubled by this, and this is why we have, as Rashi tells us, the idea that when Bilam left Balak after failing in his mission to curse, he gave him this idea to have his Midianite women seduce the Jewish men and then induce a divine punishment. So that's how Chazal tied together the two parshot, but this is an improvisation on their part. It's something that they add to the biblical narrative that is not in the biblical narrative in order to connect the two parshiot. Whereas according to Ibn Ezra's reading, the two parshiot are intimately connected. The plague that happens was something that had been foretold, and the whole story of God giving messages to this otherwise unworthy person, Bilam, was to make sure that no one would be mistaken, and in fact no one was mistaken, that the plague was the result of Bilam's curse. So that's how he reads the story. Now, as I said, I'd like to develop further two issues that come up in the Parsha. The first is Bilam's ass, and it's the ass talking to Bilam. You know the story that Bilam is riding on his animal to go to Balak, and the animal sees an angel and stops, and Bilam doesn't know why the animal stopped in the middle of the road for no reason, because he can't see the angel, so he starts beating the ass, and the ass turns around and talks to him and says, "Why are you hitting me? I'm only stopping because the road is being blocked by an angel." Now, how to understand this story? It sounds utterly fantastic. And interestingly, Ibn Ezra insinuates, of course it's not a new question, and Ibn Ezra insinuates himself into a ongoing debate that began centuries before him in Babylon, ancient Babylonia, Mesopotamia, Iraq of this day by the Gaonim in Babylon, Gaonei Bavel, and was carried on in Spain, where he lived, by some of his predecessors. So he tells us that Sa'ad Gaon said that this did not really happen. In other words, if it didn't happen, it means that this was not something in reality. The ass actually opened its mouth and spoke. It means that Bilam had a prophetic vision, a dream, or some sort of waking dream in which he saw the ass say this and go through this whole dialogue. Sa'ad Gaon was criticized by one of the Gaonim that followed him, Shmuel ben Chofni, a very important figure, who brought scriptural proof that this could not be the case, and that it actually the ass actually did speak. In other words, then in Spain, Ibn Ezra's predecessor in poetry, and not only predecessor but the master of all subsequent Hebrew poets, Shlomo ibn Gibirol, took up the position of Sa'adja. Ibn Gibirol was a real schooled philosopher, felt that this could not have happened in reality, and that it had to have been in a vision. And Ibn Ezra, like Shmuel ben Chofni, disagrees and says, no, it really did happen. Now, 2 points here. First, we see here that he's drawing on a number of sources, and some of them, for instance, Ibn Gibirol, he's the only person we know who reports these biblical interpretations by Ibn Gibirol. And there are a number of places where Ibn Ezra brings biblical interpretations by earlier thinkers such as Ibn Gibirol or Yehuda Levi that have not been preserved elsewhere. Maybe there are even, with regard to Yehuda Levi, they were living confrontations that Ibn Ezra had with him. But with regard to the issue at heart here, so on the face of it, Ibn Ezra is siding with the so-called, irrationalists, the people who believe in any miracle is possible, and so if God miraculously wants to have the ass speak, then the ass will speak. And on the other side are Ibn Gibirol and Sa'ad Gaon, who, though according to the classifications current in history of Jewish slaughter and very different sides in terms of philosophical allegiance and affiliation, agree that could not have happened, and this can be explained only as in prophetic vision. But there's a writer here. Before bringing this subject up, he cites the Midrash about the 10 items that were created at twilight on the first day, meaning at the very last moment when the universe was, coming into being and taking on its perfect, rational, orderly shape that God had designed for it. These 10 little aberrations, which we call miracles, were snuck in. Therefore, there's no reason to feel that even a wild type thing like a mule or an ass talking is impossible, not because it doesn't violate the laws of nature, but because God had pre-programmed this unique event into the universe at creation. So there's nothing here that's disturbing the orderliness of the cosmos, and many of you recognize this is very much the position of Maimonides. So on the one hand, Ibn Ezra can defend this otherwise extremely difficult to comprehend miracle by referring to this midrash. So again, we're not quite sure where to place him. He's siding with Shmuel ibn Chofni against Ibn Gabirol and Sa'adja. Sa'adja is one of his major sources. Ibn Gabirol is the ultimate Jewish Neoplatonist, and almost every book on Jewish philosophy will call Ibn Ezra Neoplatonist, but here we see him taking a different position. Now the second issue is much more delicate, and I can't really say too many things in a very definitive manner, but it has to do with this plague. As I said, according to Ibn Ezra, this plague was foretold in the stars. Bilam correctly understood from his astrological background that there would be a plague befalling Israel soon. And then we have, right after the story of Bilam and Balak, we have the Jews fooling around with the Midianite women, and we have a plague. Now, how does this all fit together? Now, the first thing I wanted to point out is that the Torah does not explicitly say that the plague came as a punishment for fooling around with the Midianite women. Clearly, there's some one can easily think that there is a connection, and I'm not. But if you look at other issues, and there are not a few of them in Sefer Bamidbar, where the Jews do wrong things and they're punished by God for doing this, it's quite straightforward. For instance, in last week's Parsha Chukat, the attack of these poisonous snakes on the Jews, it says that the Jews came and complained to Moses that they're sick of eating the man, and then the very next verse says that God sent these serpents and they killed many Jews, and then the third verse tells us the Jews coming and Moses saying, we admit we sinned, we shouldn't have complained, just get rid of these snakes. And then Moses gets rid of the snakes. So it's the causal connection between the Jewish misbehavior and the punishment of snakes sent by God is clear, explicit, and undeniable. But here, it doesn't say that. It says that God was angry that when the Jews fooled around with the Midianite women, but it doesn't say anything more. Then at the very end, the last verse in the Parashat Balak, the casualty list, or the casualties for the plague are listed. And then in the next Parsha, it says that Pinchas quelled God's anger by killing this Jewish chieftain who, in the most chutzpahdik way possible, was taking his Midianite girlfriend to his tent while all the Jews were sitting there and mourning the people who were killed in the plague. So there obviously seems to be some sort of coincidence between the plague and the sin, but it's not at all explicit, and the Torah has no problem making it explicit in other areas, which again leads one to think that perhaps there is something to Ibn Ezra's saying that this was a plague that was in the stars, foretold, that happened to come synchronically with the Jews sinning. Now this is a scenario, the idea that there being some pre-planned disaster and something that comes about in the Jewish people that causes them to sin just before this disaster is an idea that is not unknown. Maimonides makes it, I think, quite explicit in a passage in his commentary in the Mishnah, which I've written a paper about, and I think I made a video as well. So it's possible that Ibn Ezra too thinks that it's the synchronicity between these events that were pre-planned and Jewish misbehavior that lead one to connect the two and think that they're causal. Whereas, as I think David Hume would say, the fact that event B follows upon event A does not necessarily mean that event A caused event B. But we won't get into that. And so I'm just going to leave it at that. But I think that it's not just the juxtaposition, the fact that the parsha, the story of the Jews messing around with the Midianite women and then suffering from plague follows immediately upon the story of Balak and Bilam. It's also the unusual way in which the Torah doesn't want to expressly say that the plague came as a direct result of the Jewish misbehavior, as it did say in last week's parsha with regard to the attack of snakes, that lead us to think that there may be something to it, to what Ibn Ezra, and as I said, Maimonides elsewhere, says about this sort of synchronicity. So I hope you found this interesting, and thank you very much.